Section 18 of The Lane That Had No Turning. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Michelle Fry, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The Lane That Had No Turning and Other Tales Concerning the People of Pontiac by Gilbert Parker. Medallion's Whim. When the avocat began to lose his health and spirits, and there crept through his shrewd gravity and kindliness a petulance and dejection, Medallion was the only person who had an inspiriting effect upon him. The little chemist had decided that the change in him was due to bad circulation and failing powers, which was only partially true. Medallion made a deeper guess. "Want to know what's the matter with him?" he said. "Ha! I'll tell you. Woman." "Woman? God bless me," said the little chemist in a frightened way. "Woman, little man. I mean the want of a woman," said Medallion. The curé, who was present, shrugged his shoulders. "He has an excellent cook, and his bed and jackets are well aired. I see them constantly at the windows." A laugh gurgled from Medallion's throat. He loved these innocent folk, but himself went twice a year to Quebec City and had more expanded views. "Woman, Padre," nodding to the priest and rubbing his chin so that it was rasped like sandpaper. "Woman, my druggist," throwing a sly look at the chemist. "Woman, neither as cook nor bottle washer, is what he needs. Every man out of holy orders," this in deference to his good friend the curé, "arrives at the time when his youth must be renewed, or he becomes as dry bones, like an empty house, furniture sold off. Can only be renewed one way. Woman. Well, here's our avocat, and there's his remedy. He's got the cooking and the clean, fresh linen. He must have a wife, the very best." "Ah, my friend, you are droll," said the curé, arching his long fingers at his lips and blowing gently through them, but not smiling in the least, rather serious, almost reproving. "It is such a whim, said the little chemist, shaking his head and looking through his glasses sideways like a wise bird. "Ha! You shall see. The man must be saved. Our curé shall have his fees. Our druggist shall provide the finest essences for the feast, no more pills. And we shall dine with our avocat once a week, with asparagus in season for the curé, and a little good wine for all. Ha!" His ha was never a laugh. It was unctuous, abrupt, an ejaculation of satisfaction, knowledge, solid enjoyment, final solution. The curé shook his head doubtfully. He did not see the need. He did not believe in Medallion's whim. Still he knew that the man's judgment was shrewd in most things, and he would be silent and wait. But he shrank from any new phase of life likely to alter the conditions of that old companionship which included themselves, the avocat, and the young doctor, who, like the little chemist, was married. The chemist sharply replied, "Well, well, perhaps. I hope. There is a poetry." His English was not perfect, and at times he mixed it with French in an amusing fashion. "A little chanson," he said, which runs: "Sorrowful is the little house by the winding stream. All the laughter has died away out of the little house. But down there come from the lofty hills footsteps and eyes agleam, bringing the laughter of yesterday into the little house by the winding stream and the hills. Diront, 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 don." The little chemist blushed faintly at the silence that followed his timid, quaint recital. The curé looked calm and kind and drawn away as if in thought. But Medallion presently got up, stooped, and laid his long fingers on the shoulder of the apothecary. "Exactly, little man," he said. "We've both got the same idea in our heads. I've put it hard fact. You've put it soft sentiment, and it's God's truth either way." Presently the curé asked, as if from a great distance, so meditative was his voice, "Who will be the woman, Medallion?" "I've got one in my eye, the very right one for our avocat. Not here, not out of Pontiac, but from St. Jean in the hills, fulfilling your verses, gentle apothecary. She must bring what is fresh. He must feel that the hills have come to him, she that the valley is hers for the first time. A new world for them both. Ha! Regardez ça! You are a great man," said the little chemist. There was a strange, inscrutable look in the kind priest's eyes. The avocat had confessed to him in his time. Medallion took up his hat. "Where are you going?" said the little chemist. "To our avocat, and then to St. Jean." He opened the door and vanished. The two that were left shook their heads and wondered. Chuckling softly to himself, Medallion strode away through the lane of white board houses and the smoke of strong tabac from these houses, now and then pulling suddenly up to avoid stumbling over a child, where children are numbered by the dozen to every house. He came at last to a house unlike the others, in that it was of stone and larger. He leaned for a moment over the gate, and looked through a window into a room where the avocat sat propped up with cushions in a great chair, staring gloomily at 2 candles burning on the table before him. Medallion watched him for a long time. The avocat never changed his position. He only stared at the candle, and once or twice his lips moved. A woman came in and put a steaming bowl before him, and laid a pipe and matches beside the bowl. She was a very little, thin old woman, quick and quiet and watchful, his housekeeper. The avocat took no notice of her. She looked at him several times anxiously, and passed backwards and forwards behind him as a hen moves upon the flank of her brood. All at once she stopped. Her small white fingers, with their large rheumatic knuckles, lay flat on her lips as she stood for an instant musing. Then she trotted lightly to a bureau, got pen and paper and ink, reached down a bunch of keys from the mantel, and came and put them all beside the bowl and the pipe. Still the avocat did not stir, or show that he recognized her. She went to the door, turned and looked back, her fingers again at her lips, then slowly sidled out of the room. It was long before the avocat moved. His eyes had not wavered from the space between the candles. At last, however, he glanced down. His eye caught the bowl, then the pipe. He reached out a slow hand for the pipe, and was taking it up when his glance fell on the keys and the writing material. He put the pipe down, looked up at the door through which the little old woman had gone, gazed round the room, took up the keys, but soon put them down again with a sigh, and settled back in his chair. Now his gaze alternated between the long lane sloping into shadow between the candles and the keys. Medallion threw a leg over the fence and came in a few steps to the door. He opened it quietly and entered. In the dark he felt his way along the wall to the door of the avocat's room, opened it, and thrust in his ungainly, whimsical face. "Ha!" he laughed with quick, winking eyes. "Evening, Garant. Live the Code Napoleon. Pipes for 2." A change came slowly over the avocat. His eyes drew away from that vista between the candles, and the strange distant look faded out of them. "Great is the Code of Napoleon," he said mechanically. Then presently, "Ah, my friend Medallion." His first words were the answer to a formula which always passed between them on meeting. As soon as Garant had said them, Medallion's lanky body followed his face, and in a moment he had the avocat's hand in his, swallowing it, of purpose crushing it, so that Monsieur Garant waked up smartly and gave his visitor a pensive smile. Medallion's cheerful, nervous vitality seldom failed to inspire whom he chose to inspire with something of his own life and cheerfulness. In a few moments both the avocat and himself were smoking, and the contents of the steaming bowl were divided between them. Medallion talked on many things. The little old housekeeper came in, chirped a soft good evening, flashed a small thankful smile at Medallion, and after renewing the bowl and lighting 2 more tall candles, disappeared. Medallion began with the parish, passed to the law, from the law to Napoleon, from Napoleon to France, and from France to the world, drawing out from the avocat something of his old vivacity and fire. At last Medallion, seeing that the time was ripe, turned his glass round musingly in his fingers before him, and said, "Benoit, Annette's husband, died to-day, Garron. You knew him. He went singing, gone in the head, but singing as he used to do before he married or got drunk. Perhaps his youth came back to him when he was going to die, just for a minute." The avocat's eye gazed at Medallion earnestly now, and Medallion went on. "As good singing as you want to hear. You've heard the words of the song. The river drivers sing it. What is there like to the cry of the bird that sings in its nest in the lilac tree? A voice the sweetest you ever have heard. It is there, it is here, see? It is there, it is here, it must roam, and wander from shore to shore, till I go forth and bring it home, and enter and close my door. Row along home, see. When Medallion had finished saying the first verse, he waited, but the avocat said nothing. His eyes were now fastened again on that avenue between the candles, leading out into the immortal part of him, his past. He was busy with a life that had once been spent in the fields of Fontainebleau and in the shadow of the Pantheon. Medallion went on. What is there like the laughing star, far up from the lilac tree? A face that's brighter and finer far. It laughs and it shines, see. It laughs and it shines. It must roam, and travel from shore to shore, till I go forth and bring it home, and house it within my door. Row along home, see. When Medallion had finished, he raised his glass and said, "Garron, I drink to home and woman." He waited. The avocat's eyes drew away from the candles again, and he came to his feet suddenly, swaying slightly as he did so. He caught up a glass and, lifting it, said, "I drink to home and—" A little cold burst of laughter came from him. He threw his head back with something like disdain. "And the code Napoleon," he added abruptly. Then he put the glass down without drinking, wheeled back, and dropped into his chair. Presently he got up, took his keys, went over, opened the bureau, and brought back a well-worn notebook which looked like a diary. He seemed to have forgotten Medallion's presence, but it was not so. He had reached the moment of disclosure which comes to every man, no matter how secretive, when he must tell what is on his mind or die. He opened the book with trembling fingers, took a pen and wrote, at first slowly, while Medallion smoked. September 13th. It is 25 years ago to-day. Mon Dieu, how we danced that night on the flags before the Sorbonne! How gay we were in the Maison Bleue! We were gay and happy, Lully and I. 2 rooms and a few francs ahead every week. That night we danced and poured out the light wine, because we were to be married tomorrow. Perhaps there will be a child if the priest blessed us, she whispered to me as we watched the soft travelling moon in the Jardin of the Luxembourg. Well, we danced. There was an artist with us. I saw him catch Lully about the waist and kiss her on the neck. She was angry, but I did not think of that. I was mad with wine. I quarrelled with her and said to her a shameful thing. Then I rushed away. We were not married the next day. I could not find her. One night soon after, there was a revolution of students at Montparnasse. I was hurt. I remember she came to me then and nursed me, but when I got well, she was gone. Then came the secret word from the government that I must leave the country or go to prison. I came here. Alas, it is long since we danced before the Sorbonne and supped at the Maison Bleue. I shall never see again the Jardins of the Luxembourg. Well, that was a mad night, 25 years ago. His pen went faster and faster. His eyes lighted up. He seemed quite forgetful of Medallion's presence. When he finished, a fresh change came over him. He gathered his thin fingers in a bunch at his lips and made an airy salute to the warm space between the candles. He drew himself together with a youthful air and held his grey head gallantly. Youth and age in him seemed almost grotesquely mingled. Sprightly notes from the song of the Café Chantant hovered on his thin, dry lips. Medallion, amused, yet with a hushed kind of feeling through all his nerves, pushed the avocat's tumbler till it touched his fingers. The thin fingers twined round it, and once more he came to his feet. He raised the glass. To... For a minute he got no further. To the wedding eve, he said, and sipped the hot wine. Presently he pushed the little well-worn book over to Medallion. I have known you 15 years. Read, he said. He gave Medallion a meaning look out of his now flashing eyes. Medallion's bony face responded cordially. Of course, he answered, picked up the book, and read what the avocat had written. It was on the last page. When he had finished reading, he held the book musingly. His whim had suddenly taken on a new color. The avocat, who had been walking up and down the room with the quick step of a young man, stopped before him, took the book from him, turned to the first page, and handed it back silently. Medallion read, Quebec, September 13th, 18 . It is 1 year since. I shall learn to love some day. Medallion looked up at him. The old man threw back his head, spread out the last page in the book which he had just written, and said defiantly, as though expecting contradiction to his self-deception, I have learned. Then he laughed, but the laugh was dry and hollow and painful. It suddenly passed from his wrinkled lips, and he sat down again, but now with an air as of shyness and shame. Let us talk, he said, of the Code Napoleon. The next morning Medallion visited St. Jean in the hills. 5 years before he had sold to a newcomer at St. Jean, Madame Lecret, the furniture of a little house, and there had sprung up between them a quiet friendship, not the less admiring on Medallion's part because Madame Lecret was a good friend to the poor and the sick. She never tired, when they met, of hearing him talk of the curé, the little chemist, and the avocat, and in the avocat she seemed to take the most interest, making countless inquiries, countless when spread over many conversations, upon his life during the time Medallion had known him. He knew also that she came to Pontiac occasionally, but only in the evening, and once in a moonlight night he had seen her standing before the window of the avocat's house. Once also he had seen her veiled in the little crowded courtroom of Pontiac when an interesting case was being tried, and noticed how she watched Monsieur Garon, standing so very still that she seemed lifeless, and how she stole out as soon as he had done speaking. Medallion had acute instincts, and was supremely a man of self-counsel. What he thought he kept to himself until there seemed necessity to speak. A few days before the momentous one herebefore described, he had called at Madame Lecret's house, and in course of conversation told her that the avocat's health was breaking, that the day before he had got completely fogged in court over the simplest business, and was quite unlike his old, shrewd, kindly self. By this time he was almost prepared to see her turn pale and her fingers flutter at the knitting needles she held. She made an excuse to leave the room for a moment. He saw a little book lying near the chair from which she had risen. Perhaps it had dropped from her pocket. He picked it up. It was a book of French songs, Béranger's and others less notable. On the fly-leaf was written, "From Victor to Lully, September 13th, 18 ." Presently she came back to him, quite recovered and calm, inquiring how the avocat was cared for, and hoped he would have every comfort and care. Medallion grew on the instant bold. He was now certain that Victor was the avocat, and Lully was Madame Lecret. He said abruptly to her, "Why not come and cheer him up? Such old friends as you are." At that she rose with a little cry and stared anxiously at him. He pointed to the book of songs. "Don't be angry. I looked," he said. She breathed quick and hard, and said nothing, but her fingers laced and interlaced nervously in her lap. "If you were friends, why don't you go to him?" he said. She shook her head mournfully. "We were more than friends, and that is different." "You were his wife?" said Medallion gently. "It was different," she replied, flushing. "France is not the same as here. We were to be married, but on the eve of our wedding day there was an end to it all. Only 5 years ago I found out he was here." Then she became silent, and would or could speak no more, only she said at last before he went, "You will not tell him or anyone?" She need not have asked Medallion. He knew many secrets and kept them, which is not the usual way of good-humoured people. But now, with the story told by the avocat himself in his mind, he saw the end of the long romance. He came once more to the house of Madame Lecret, and, being admitted, said to her, "You must come at once with me." She trembled towards him. "He is worse. He is dying." He smiled. "Not dying at all. He needs you. Come along. I'll tell you as we go." But she hung back. Then he told her all he had seen and heard the evening before. Without a word further, she prepared to go. On the way he turned to her and said, "You are Madame Lecret?" "I am as he left me," she replied timidly, but with a kind of pride too. "Don't mistake me," he said. "I thought perhaps you had been married since." The avocat sat in his little office, feebly fumbling among his papers, as Medallion entered on him and called to him cheerily, "We are coming to see you tonight, Garon, the curé, our little chemist, and the seigneur, coming to supper." The avocat put out his hand courteously, but he said in a shrinking, pained voice, "No, no, not tonight, Medallion. I would wish no visitors this night of all." Medallion stooped over him and caught him by both arms gently. "We shall see," he said. "It is the anniversary," he whispered. "Ah, pardon," said the avocat with a reproving pride, and shrank back as if all his nerves had been laid bare. But Medallion turned, opened the door, went out, and let in a woman who came forward and timidly raised her veil. "Victor," Medallion heard. Then, "Lully?" And then he shut the door, and with supper in his mind went into the kitchen to see the housekeeper, who in this new joy had her own tragedy, humming to himself, "But down there come from the lofty hills footsteps and eyes agleam, bringing the laughter of yesterday into the little house." End of section 18. Medallion's Whim.
Section 19 of The Lane That Had No Turning. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kate Follis. The Lane That Had No Turning, and Other Tales Concerning the People of Pontiac by Gilbert Parker. The prisoner. His chief occupation in the daytime was to stand on the bench by the small barred window and watch the pigeons on the roof and in the eaves of the house opposite. For 5 years he had done this. In the summer a great fire seemed to burn beneath the tin of the roof, for a quivering hot air rose from them, and the pigeons never alighted on them, save in the early morning or in the evening. Just over the peak could be seen the topmost branch of a maple, too slight to bear the weight of the pigeons, but the eaves were dark and cool, and there his eyes rested when he tired of the hard blue sky and the glare of the slates. In winter the roof was covered for weeks and months by a blanket of snow, which looked like a shawl of impacted wool, white and restful, and the windows of the house were spread with frost. But the pigeons were always gay, walking on the ledges or crowding on the shelves of the lead pipes. He studied them much, but he loved them more. His prison was less a prison because of them, and during those long 5 years he found himself more in touch with them than with the wardens of the prison or with any of his fellow prisoners. To the former he was respectful, and he gave them no trouble at all. With the latter he had nothing in common, for they were criminals, and he, so wild and mad with drink and anger was he at the time, that he had no remembrance, absolutely none, of how Jean Gamache lost his life. He remembered that they had played cards far into the night, that they had quarrelled, then made their peace, that the others had left, that they had begun gaming and drinking and quarrelling again, and then everything was blurred, save for a vague recollection that he had won all Gamache's money and had pocketed it. Afterwards came a blank. He waked to find 2 officers of the law beside him, and the body of Jean Gamache, stark and dreadful, a few feet away. When the officers put their hands upon him, he shook them off. When they did it again, he would have fought them to the death, had it not been for his friend, tall Medallion, the auctioneer, who laid a strong hand on his arm and said, "Steady, Turgeon, steady," and he had yielded to the firm, friendly pressure. Medallion had left no stone unturned to clear him at the trial, had himself played detective unceasingly. But the hard facts remained, and on a chain of circumstantial evidence Blaise Turgeon was convicted of manslaughter and sent to prison for 10 years. Blaise himself had said that he did not remember, but he could not believe that he had committed the crime. Robbery? He shrugged his shoulders at that. He insisted that his lawyer should not reply to the foolish and insulting suggestion. But the evidence went to show that Gamache had all the winnings when the other members of the party retired, and this very money had been found in Blaise's pocket. There was only Blaise's word that they had played cards again. Anger? Possibly. Blaise could not recall, though he knew they had quarrelled. The judge himself, charging the jury, said that he never before had seen a prisoner so frank, so outwardly honest, but he warned them that they must not lose sight of the crime itself, the taking of a human life, whereby a woman was made a widow and a child fatherless. The jury found him guilty. With few remarks the judge delivered his sentence, and then himself, shaken and pale, left the courtroom hurriedly, for Blaise Turgeon's father had been his friend from boyhood. Blaise took his sentence calmly, looking the jury squarely in the eyes, and when the judge stopped he bowed to him, and then turned to the jury and said, "Gentlemen, you have ruined my life. You don't know, and I don't know, who killed the man. You have guessed, and I take the penalty. Suppose I'm innocent, how will you feel when the truth comes out? You've known me more or less these 20 years, and you've said, with evidently no more knowledge than I've got, that I did this horrible thing. I don't know but that one of you did it. But you are safe, and I take my 10 years." He turned from them, and as he did so, he saw a woman looking at him from a corner of the courtroom with a strange, wild expression. At the moment he saw no more than an excited, bewildered face, but afterwards this face came and went before him, flashing in and out of dark places in a kind of mockery. As he went from the courtroom, another woman made her way to him in spite of the guards. It was the Little Chemist's wife, who years before had been his father's housekeeper, who knew him when his eyes first opened on the world. "My poor Blaze, my poor Blaze," she said, clasping his manacled hands. In prison he refused to see all visitors, even Medallion, the Little Chemist's wife, and the good Father Fabre. Letters, too, he refused to accept and read. He had no contact, wished no contact with the outer world, but lived his hard, lonely life by himself, silent, studious. For now books were a pleasure to him. He had entered his prison a wild, excitable, dissipated youth, and he had become a mature, brooding man. 5 years had done the work of 20. The face of the woman who looked at him so strangely in the courtroom haunted him so that at last it became a part of his real life. Lived largely at the window, where he looked out at the pigeons on the roof of the hospital. "She was sorry for me," he said many a time to himself. He was shaken with misery often, so that he rocked to and fro as he sat on his bed, and a warder heard him cry out, even in the last days of his imprisonment, "O God, canst thou do everything but speak?" And again, "That hour, the memory of that hour, in exchange for my ruined life." One day the jailer came to him and said, "Monsieur Turgeon, you are free. The governor has cut off 5 years from your sentence." Then he was told that people were waiting without, Medallion, the Little Chemist and his wife, and others more important. But he would not go to meet them, and he stepped into the open world alone at dawn the next morning and looked out upon a still sleeping village. Suddenly there stood before him a woman who had watched by the prison gates all night, and she put out her hand in entreaty and said with a breaking voice, "You are free at last." He remembered her, the woman who had looked at him so anxiously and sorrowfully in the courtroom. "Why did you come to meet me?" he asked. "I was sorry for you. But that is no reason." "I once committed a crime," she whispered, with shrinking bitterness. "That's bad," he said. "Were you punished?" He looked at her keenly, almost fiercely, for a curious suspicion shot into his mind. She shook her head and answered no. "That's worse. I let someone else take my crime upon him and be punished for it," she said, an agony in her eyes. "Why was that?" "I had a little child," was her reply. "And the man who was punished instead?" "He was alone in the world," she said. A bitter smile crept to his lips, and his face was afire. He shut his eyes, and when they opened again, discovery was in them. "I remember you now," he said. "I remember now. I waked and saw you looking at me that night. Who was the father of your child?" "Jean Gamache," she replied. "He ruined me and left me to starve." "I am innocent of his death," he said quietly and gladly. She nodded. He was silent for a moment. "The child still lives?" he asked. She nodded again. "Well, let it be so," he said. "But you owe me 5 years and a good name." "I wish to God I could give them back," she cried, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It was for my child. He was so young." "It can't be helped now," he said, sighing, and he turned away from her. "Won't you forgive me?" she asked bitterly. "Won't you give me back those 5 years?" "If the child did not need me, I would give my life," she answered. "I owe it to you." Her haggard, haunted face made him sorry. He, too, had suffered. "It's all right," he answered gently. "Take care of your child." Again he moved away from her and went down the little hill with a cloud gone from his face that had rested there 5 years. Once he turned to look back. The woman was gone, but over the prison a flock of pigeons were flying. He took off his hat to them. Then he went through the town, looking neither to right nor left, and came to his own house, where the summer morning was already entering the open windows, though he had thought to find the place closed and dark. The Little Chemist's wife met him in the doorway. She could not speak, nor could he, but he kissed her as he had done when he went condemned to prison. Then he passed on to his own room, and entering, sat down before the open window and peacefully drank in the glory of a new world. But more than once he choked down a sob rising in his throat. End of section 19. Section 20 of The Lane That Had No Turning. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kate Follis. The Lane That Had No Turning and Other Tales Concerning the People of Pontiac by Gilbert Parker. An Upset Price. Once Secord was as fine a man to look at as you would care to see, with a large, intelligent eye, a clear, healthy skin, and a full brown beard. He walked with a spring, had the gift of conversation, and took life as he found it, never too seriously, yet never carelessly. That was before he left the village of Pontiac in Quebec to offer himself as a surgeon to the American army. When he came back there was a change in him. He was still handsome, but something of the spring had gone from his walk. The quick light of his eyes had given place to a dark, dreamy expression. His skin became a little dulled, and his talk slower, though not less musical or pleasant. Indeed, his conversation had distinctly improved. Previously there was an undercurrent of self-consciousness. It was all gone now. He talked as one knowing his audience. His office became again, as it had been before, a rendezvous for the few interesting men of the place, including the avocat, the cure, the Little Chemist, and Medallion. They played chess and écarté for certain hours of certain evenings in the week at Secord's house. Medallion was the first to notice that the wife, whom Secord had married soon after he came back from the war, occasionally put down her work and looked with a curious, inquiring expression at her husband as he talked. It struck Medallion that she was puzzled by some change in Secord. Secord was a brilliant surgeon, and with the knife in his hand, or beside a sick bed, was admirable. His intuitive perception, so necessary in a physician, was very fine. He appeared to get at the core of a patient's trouble, and to decide upon necessary action with instant and absolute confidence. Some delicate operation performed by him was recorded and praised in the Lancet, and he was offered a responsible post in a medical college, and at the same time the goodwill of a valuable practice. He declined both, to the lasting astonishment, yet personal joy, of the Cure and the Avocat, but as time went on, not so much to the surprise of the Little Chemist and Medallion. After 3 years, the sleepy Little Chemist waked up suddenly in his chair one day and said, "Parbleu! God bless me!" He loved to mix his native language with English, got up and went over to Secord's office, adjusted his glasses, looked at Secord closely, caught his hand with both of his own, shook it with shy abruptness, came back to his shop, sat down, and said, "God bless my soul, regardez ça!" Medallion made his discovery sooner. Watching closely, he had seen a pronounced deliberation infused through all Secord's indolence of manner, and noticed that often, before doing anything, the big eyes debated steadfastly, and the long, slender fingers ran down the beard softly. At times there was a deep meditativeness in the eye, again a dusky fire. But there was a certain charm through it all, a languid precision, a slumbering look in the face, a vague undercurrent in the voice, a fantastical flavour to the thought. The change had come so gradually that only Medallion and the wife had a real conception of how great it was. Medallion had studied Secord from every standpoint. At the very first he wondered if there was a woman in it. Much thinking on a woman whose influence on his life was evil or disturbing might account somewhat for the change in Secord. But, seeing how fond the man was of his wife, Medallion gave up that idea. It was not liquor, for Secord never touched it. One day, however, when Medallion was selling the furniture of a house, he put up a feather bed, and, as was his custom, for he was a whimsical fellow, let his humour have play. He used many metaphors as to the virtue of the bed, crowning them with the statement that you slept in it dreaming as delicious dreams as though you had eaten poppy or mandragora or... He stopped short, said, "By Jingo, that's it!" knocked the bed down instantly, and was an utter failure for the rest of the day. The wife was longer in discovering the truth, but a certain morning, as her husband lay sleeping after an all-night sitting with a patient, she saw, lying beside him, it had dropped from his waistcoat pocket, a little bottle full of a dark liquid. She knew that he always carried his medicine vials in a pocket case. She got the case and saw that none was missing. She noticed that the cork of the vial was well worn. She took it out and smelled the liquid. Then she understood. She waited and watched. She saw him after he waked look watchfully round, quietly take a wine glass, and let the liquid come, drop by drop, into it from the point of his forefinger. Henceforth she read with understanding the changes in his manner, and saw behind the mingled abstraction and fanciful meditation of his talk. She had not yet made up her mind what to do. She saw that he hid it from her assiduously. He did so more because he wished not to pain her than from furtiveness. By nature he was open and brave, and had always had a reputation for plainness and sincerity. She was in no sense his equal in intelligence or judgment, not even in instinct. She was a woman of more impulse and constitutional good nature than depth. It is probable that he knew that, and refrained from letting her into the knowledge of this vice, contracted in the war, when, seriously ill, he was able to drag himself about from patient to patient only by the help of opium. He was alive to his position and its consequences, and faced it. He had no children, and he was glad of this for one reason. He could do nothing now without the drug. It was as necessary as light to him. The little bottle had been his friend so long that, with his finger on its smooth-edged cork, it was as though he held the tap of life. The Little Chemist and Medallion kept the thing to themselves, but they understood each other in the matter, and wondered what they could do to cure him. The Little Chemist only shrank back and said, "No, no, pardon, my friend," when Medallion suggested that he should speak to Secord. But the Little Chemist was greatly concerned, for had not Secord saved his beloved wife by a clever operation, and was it not her custom to devote a certain hour every week to the welfare of Secord's soul and body before the shrine of the Virgin? Her husband told her now that Secord was in trouble, and though he was far from being devout himself, he had a shy faith in the great sincerity of his wife. She did her best, and increased her offerings of flowers to the shrine. Also, in her simplicity, she sent Secord's wife little jars of jam to comfort him. One evening the little coterie met by arrangement at the doctor's house. After waiting an hour or two for Secord, who had been called away to a critical case, the Avocat and the Cure went home, leaving polite, old-fashioned messages for their absent host. But the Little Chemist and Medallion remained. For a time Mrs. Secord remained with them, then retired, begging them to await her husband, who, she knew, would be grateful if they stayed. The Little Chemist, with timid courtesy, showed her out of the room, then came back and sat down. They were very silent. The Little Chemist took off his glasses a half-dozen times, wiped them and put them back, then suddenly turned on Medallion. "You mean to speak tonight?" "Yes, that's what I intend, just here." "Regardez ça. Well, well." Medallion never smoked harder than he did then. The Little Chemist looked at him nervously again and again, listened towards the door, fingered with his tumbler, and at last, hearing the sound of sleigh bells, suddenly came to his feet and said, "Voilà, I will go to my wife." And catching up his cap, and forgetting his overcoat, he trotted away home in fright. What Medallion did or said to Secord that night neither ever told. But it must have been a singular scene, for when the humorist pleads or prays there is no pathos like it. And certainly Medallion's eyes were red when he wrapped up the Little Chemist at dawn, caught him by the shoulders, turned him round several times, thumped him on the back, and called him a bully old boy, and then, seeing the old wife in her quaint padded nightgown, suddenly hugged her, threw himself into a chair, and almost shouted for a cup of coffee. At the same time Mrs. Secord was alternately crying and laughing in her husband's arms, and he was saying to her, "I'll make a fight for it, Lesley, a big fight, but you must be patient, for I expect I'll be a devil sometimes without it. Why, I've eaten a dram a day of the stuff, or drunk its equivalent in the tincture. No, never mind praying. Be a brick and fight with me. That's the game, my girl." He did make a fight for it. Such an one as few men have made and come out safely. For those who dwell in the pit never suffer as do they who struggle with this appetite. He was too wise to give it up all at once. He diminished the dose gradually, but still very perceptibly. As it was, it made a marked change in him. The necessary effort of the will gave a kind of hard coldness to his face, and he used to walk his garden for hours at night in conflict with his enemy. His nerves were uncertain, but, strange to say, when, it was not often, any serious case of illness came under his hands, he was somehow able to pull himself together and do his task gallantly enough. But he had no important surgical case since he began his cure. In his heart he lived in fear of one, for he was not quite sure of himself. In spite of effort to the contrary, he became irritable, and his old pleasant fantasies changed to gloomy and bizarre imaginings. The wife never knew what it cost her husband thus, day by day, to take a foe by the throat and hold him in check. She did not guess that he knew if he dropped back even once, he could not regain himself. This was his idiosyncrasy. He did not find her a great help to him in his trouble. She was affectionate, but she had not much penetration even where he was concerned, and she did not grasp how much was at stake. She thought, indeed, that he should be able to give it up all at once. He was tender with her, but he wished often that she could understand him without explanation on his part. Many a time he took out the little bottle with a reckless hand, but conquered himself. He got most help, perhaps, from the honest, cheerful eye of Medallion and the stumbling, timorous affection of the Little Chemist. They were perfectly disinterested friends. His wife at times made him aware that he had done her a wrong, for he had married her with this appetite on him. He did not defend himself, but he wished she would, even if she had to act it, make him believe in himself more. One morning, against his will, he was irritable with her, and she said something that burnt like caustic. He smiled ironically and pushed his newspaper over to her, pointing to a paragraph. It was the announcement that an old admirer of hers, whom she had passed by for her husband, had come into a fortune. "Perhaps you've made a mistake," he said. She answered nothing, but the look she gave was unfortunate for both. He muffled his mouth in his long silken beard, as if to smother what he felt impelled to say, then suddenly rose and left the table. At this time he had reduced his dose of the drug to 8 drops twice a day. With a grim courage he resolved to make it 5, all at once. He did so, and held to it. Medallion was much with him in these days. One morning in the spring he got up, went out in his garden, drew in the fresh sweet air with a great gulp, picked some lovely crab-apple blossoms, and with a strange glowing look in his eyes, came in to his wife, put them into her hands, and kissed her. It was the anniversary of their wedding day. Then, without a word, he took from his pocket the little vial that he had carried so long, rolled it for an instant in his palm, felt its worn, discoloured cork musingly, and threw it out of the window. "Now, my dear," he whispered, "we will be happy again." He held to his determination with a stern anxiety. He took a month's vacation and came back better. He was not so happy as he hoped to be, yet he would not whisper to himself the reason why. He felt that something had failed him somewhere. One day a man came riding swiftly up to his door to say that his wife's father had met with a bad accident in his great mill. Secord told his wife. A peculiar troubled look came into his face as he glanced carefully over his instruments and through his medicine case. "God, I must do it alone," he said. The old man's injury was a dangerous one. A skillful operation was necessary. As Secord stood beside the sufferer, he felt his nerves suddenly go, just as they did in the war before he first took the drug. His wife was in the next room. He could hear her. He wished she would make no sound at all. Unless this operation was performed successfully, the sufferer would die. He might die anyhow. Secord tried to gather himself up to his task, but he felt it was of no use. A month later, when he was more recovered physically, he would be able to perform the operation, but the old man was dying now, while he stood helplessly stroking his big brown beard. He took up his pocket medicine case and went out where his wife was. Excited and tearful, she started up to meet him, painfully inquiring. "Can you save him?" she said. "Oh, James, what is the matter? You're trembling." "It's just this way, Leslie. My nerve is broken. I can't perform the operation as I am, and he will die in an hour if I don't." She caught him by the arm. "Can you not be strong? You have a will. Will you not try to save my father, James? Is there no way?" "Yes, there is one way," he said. He opened the pocket case and took out a phial of laudanum. "This is the way. I can pull myself together with it. It will save his life." There was a dogged look in his face. "Well, well?" she said. "Oh, my dear father, will you not keep him here?" A peculiar cold smile hovered about his lips. "But there is danger to me in this. And remember, he is very old." "Oh!" she cried. "How can you be so shocking, so cruel?" She rocked herself to and fro. "If it will save him, and you need not take it again, ever." "But I tell you—" "Do you not hear him? He is dying." She was mad with grief. She hardly knew what she said. Without a word, he dropped the tincture swiftly in a wine-glass of water, drank it off, shivered, drew himself up with a start, gave a sigh as if some huge struggle was over, and went in to where the old man was. 3 hours after, he told his wife that her father was safe. When, after a hasty kiss, she left him and went into the room of sickness, and the door closed after her, standing where she had left him, he laughed a hard, crackling laugh, and said between his teeth, "An upset price." Then he poured out another portion of the dark tincture, the largest he had ever taken, and tossed it off. That night he might have been seen feeling about the grass in a moonlit garden. At last he put something in his pocket with a quick, harsh chuckle of satisfaction. It was a little black bottle with a well-worn cork. End of section 20. Section 21 of The Lane That Had No Turning. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kate Follis. The Lane That Had No Turning, and Other Tales Concerning the People of Pontiac by Gilbert Parker. A Fragment of Lives. They met at last, Dubarre and Villiard, the man who had stolen from him the woman he loved. Both had wronged the woman, but Villiard most, for he had let her die because of jealousy. They were now in a room alone in the forest of Saint Sebastian. Both were quiet, and both knew that the end of their hatred was near. Going to a cupboard, Dubarre brought out 4 glasses and put them on the table. Then from 2 bottles he poured out what looked like red wine, 2 glasses from each bottle. Putting the bottles back, he returned to the table. "Do you dare to drink with me?" Dubarre asked, nodding towards the glasses. "2 of the glasses have poison in them. 2 have good red wine only. We will move them about and then drink. Both may die, or only one of us." Villiard looked at the other with contracting, questioning eyes. "You would play that game with me?" he asked in a mechanical voice. "It would give me great pleasure." The voice had a strange, ironical tone. "It is grand sport, as one would take a run at a crevasse and clear it, or fall. If we both fall, we are in good company. If you fall, I have the greater joy of escape. If I fall, you have the same joy." "I am ready," was the answer. "But let us eat first." A great fire burned in the chimney, for the night was cool. It filled the room with a gracious heat, and with huge, comfortable shadows. Here and there on the wall a tin cup flashed back the radiance of the fire. The barrel of a gun glistened soberly along a rafter, and the long, wiry hair of an otter skin in the corner sent out little needles of light. Upon the fire a pot was simmering, and a good savour came from it. A wind went lilting by outside the hut, in tune with the singing of the kettle. The ticking of a huge, old-fashioned repeating watch on the wall was in unison with these. Dubarre rose from the table, threw himself upon the little pile of otter skins, and lay watching Villiard and mechanically studying the little room. Villiard took the 4 glasses filled with the wine and laid them on a shelf against the wall, then began to put the table in order for their supper, and to take the pot from the fire. Dubarre noticed that just above where the glasses stood on the shelf a crucifix was hanging, and that red crystal sparkled in the hands and feet where the nails should be driven in. There was a painful humour in the association. He smiled, then turned his head away, for old memories flashed through his brain. He had been an acolyte once. He had served at the altar. Suddenly Dubarre rose, took the glasses from the shelf, and placed them in the middle of the table, the death's head for the feast. As they sat down to eat, the eyes of both men unconsciously wandered to the crucifix, attracted by the red sparkle of the rubies. They drank water with the well-cooked meat of the wapiti, though red wine faced them on the table. Each ate heartily, as though a long day were before them and not the shadow of the long night. There was no speech save that of the usual courtesies of the table. The fire and the wind and the watch seemed the only living things besides themselves, perched there between heaven and earth. At length the meal was finished, and the 2 turned in their chairs towards the fire. There was no other light in the room, and on the faces of the 2, still and cold, the flame played idly. "When?" said Dubarre at last. "Not yet," was the quiet reply. "I was thinking of my first theft, an apple from my brother's plate," said Dubarre with a dry smile. "You?" "I, of my first lie. That apple was the sweetest fruit I ever tasted." "And I took the penalty of the lie, but I had no sorrow." Again there was silence. "Now?" asked Villiard, after an hour had passed. "I am ready." They came to the table. "Shall we bind our eyes?" asked Dubarre. "I do not know the glasses that hold the poison." "Nor I the bottles that held it. I will turn my back, and do you change about the glasses." Villiard turned his face towards the timepiece on the wall. As he did so it began to strike, a clear, silvery chime. 1, 2, 3. Before it had finished striking, both men were facing the glasses again. "Take one," said Dubarre. Villiard took the one nearest himself. Dubarre took one also. Without a word they lifted the glasses and drank. "Again," said Dubarre. "You choose," responded Villiard. Dubarre lifted the one nearest himself, and Villiard picked up the other. Raising their glasses again, they bowed to each other and drank. The watch struck 12 and stopped its silvery chiming. They both sat down, looking at each other, the light of an enormous chance in their eyes, the tragedy of a great stake in their clenched hands. But the deeper, intenser power was in the face of Dubarre, the explorer. There was more than power. Malice drew down the brows and curled the sensitive upper lip. Each man watched the other for knowledge of his own fate. The glasses lay straggling along the table, emptied of death and life. All at once a horrible pallor spread over the face of Villiard, and his head jerked forward. He grasped the table with both hands, twitching and trembling. His eyes stared wildly at Dubarre, to whose face the flush of wine had come, whose look was now maliciously triumphant. Villiard had drunk both glasses of the poison. "I win!" Dubarre stood up. Then, leaning over the table towards the dying man, he added, "You let her die. Well, would you know the truth? She loved you, always." Villiard gasped, and his look wandered vaguely along the opposite wall. Dubarre went on. "I played the game with you honestly, because it was the greatest man could play. And I, too, sinned against her. Now die. She loved you. Murderer." The man's look still wandered distractedly along the wall. The sweat of death was on his face. His lips were moving spasmodically. Suddenly his look became fixed. He found voice. "Pardon, Jésus," he said, and stiffened where he sat. His eyes were fixed on the jewelled crucifix. Dubarre snatched it from the wall, and hastening to him held it to his lips, but the warm sparkle of the rubies fell on eyes that were cold as frosted glass. Dubarre saw that he was dead. "Because the woman loved him," he said, gazing curiously at the dead man. He turned, went to the door, and opened it, for his breath choked him. All was still on the wooded heights and in the wide valley. "Because the woman loved him, he repented," said Dubarre again, with a half-cynical gentleness, as he placed the crucifix on the dead man's breast. End of section 21.
Section 22 of The Lane That Had No Turning. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Marianne Spiegel. The Lane That Had No Turning, and Other Tales Concerning the People of Pontiac, by Gilbert Parker. The Man That Died at Alma. The man who died at Alma had a Kilkenny brogue that you could not cut with a knife. But he was called Kilquahanity, a name as Scottish as MacGregor. Kilquahanity was a retired soldier, on pension, and Pontiac was a place of peace and poverty. The only gentry were the curé, the advocate, and the young signor, but of the three the only one with a private income was the young signor. What should such a common man as Kilklehanity do with a private income? It seemed almost suspicious, instead of creditable, to the minds of the simple folk at Pontiac, for they were French, and poor, and laborious, and Kilklehanity drew his pension from the headquarters of the English government, which they only knew by legends wafted to them over great tracts of country from the city of Quebec. When Kilklehanity first came with his wife, it was without introductions from anywhere, unlike everybody else in Pontiac, whose family history could be instantly reduced to an exact record by the curé. He had a smattering of French, which he turned off with oily brusqueness. He was not closed-mouthed. He talked freely of events in his past life, and he told some really wonderful tales of his experience in the British Army. He was no braggart, however, and his one great story, which gave him the nickname by which he was called at Pontiac, was told far more in a spirit of laughter at himself than in praise of his own part in the incident. The first time he told the story was in the house of Medallion, the auctioneer. "Oh, the night it was," said Kilklehanity, after a pause, blowing a cloud of tobacco smoke in the air. "The night it was, me darlings. Bither cauld in that Rousian country, though but late summer, and nothing to ate but a lump of bread, no bigger than a dicky bird's skull. Nothing to drink but wather. Turrible, turrible, and for clothes to wear. Mother of Moses, that was a bad day for clothes. We got betune no barrack quilts that night. No stocking had I inside me boots. No shirt had I, but a hare's quilt sewed on to me. No heart I had inside me body. Nothing at all but duty and standing to orders, me byes. Says Sergeant Major Kilpatrick to me, 'Kilklehanity,' says he, 'there's bither places than River Alma to live by,' says he. Faith, and by the Liffey I wish I was this moment. Liffey's in old Ireland, Frenchies. But, Kilklehanity, says he, 'faith, and it's the Liffey we'll never see again, and put that in your pipe and smoke it.' And through for him. But that night, oh, that night, every bone in me body was aching, and sure me heart was aching too, for the poor boys that were fighting hard and getting little for it. Bither cauld it was, bither cauld, and the boys dropping down, dropping, 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 with the Rousian bullets in them. 'Kilklehanity,' says Sergeant Major Kilpatrick to me, 'it's this standing still, while we be dropping, dropping, that girds the soul avier.' Oh, the sight it was, the sight it was. The boys of the regiment, standing, shoulder to shoulder, and the faces of 'em blue with powder, and red with blood, and the bits of boys dropping round me, like twigs of an old tree in a storm. Just a cry and a bit of a gurgle through the teeth, and divil the one of them would see the lifey side any more. 'The Rousians are charging,' shouts Sergeant Major Kilpatrick. 'The Rousians are charging, here they come.' Standing beside me was a bit of a lump of a bye, as fine a lad as ever stood in the boots of me regiment. Ah, the look of his face was the look of the dead. 'The Rousians are coming, they're charging,' says Sergeant Major Kilpatrick, and the bit of a bye that had nothing to eat all day throws down his gun and turns round to run. 18 years old he was, only 18, just a straight slip of a lad from Malahide. 'Hold on, Teddy,' says I, 'hold on. How'll you face your mother if you turn your back on the enemy of your country?' The bye looks at me in the eyes long enough to wink 3 times, picks up his gun, and stood like a rock, he did, till the Rousians charged us, roared on us, and I saw me slip of a bye go down under the sabre of a damned Cossack. 'Mother,' I heard him say. 'Mother,' and that's all I heard him say, and the mother waiting away aft there by the lifey side. Ah, whirra, whirra. The byes go down to battle, and the mothers wait at home. Some of the bys come back, but the most of them stay where the battle laves them. Wirra. Many's the by went down that day by Alma River, and never come back. There I was standing when hell broke loose on the bys of me regiment, and devil the one of me knows if I killed a Roosian that day or not. But Sergeant Major Kilpatrick, a bit of a liar was the Sergeant Major, says he. It was 10 ye killed, Kilquahanity, he says to me the night that I left the regiment for ever, and all the bys standing round and lifting glasses and saying, Kilquahanity, 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 as if it was sugar and honey in their mouths. Oh, the sound of it. Kilquahanity, says he, it was 10 ye killed. But all bys. The Sergeant Major was an awful liar. If he could be doing anybody any good by lying, sure he would be lying all the time. But it's little I know how many I killed, for I was killed myself that day. A Roosian sabre claved the shoulder and neck of me, and down I went, and over me trampled a squadron of Roosian horses, and I stopped thinking. Oh, so easy, so easy. I slipped away of the fight. Their shrieking and roaring kept dwindling and dwindling, and I dropped all into a fine sleep. So quiet, so easy. And I thought that slip of a lad, from the life beside, was holding me hand and saying, Mother, Mother, and we both went asleep. And the bys of the regiment, when Alma was over, they said to each other, the bys, they said, Kilquahanity's dead. And the trenches was dug, and all we fine dead boys was laid in long rows like candles in the trenches. And I was laid in among them, and Sergeant Major Kilpatrick standing there and looking at me and saying, Poor by, poor by. But when they threw another man on top of me, I waked up out of that beautiful sleep and gave him a kick. You're not polite, says I to myself. Sure, I couldn't spake, there was no strength in me. And they threw another man on, and I kicked again. And the Sergeant Major, he sees it, and shouts out, Kilquahanity's legs a-kicking, says he. And they pulled off the 2 poor devils that had been thrown o' top of me. And the Sergeant Major lifts me head, and he says, You're not killed, Kilquahanity, says he. Divil a word could I spake, but I winked at him, and Captain Masham, standing by, whisked out a flask. Put that between his teeth, says he. When I got it there, thrust me for not letting it go. And the Sergeant Major says to me, I have hopes of you, Kilquahanity, when you do be drinking like that. And a fine thirsty healthy corpse I am, says I. A dozen hands stretched out to give Kilquahanity a drink, for even the best story of Pontiac could not have told his tale so well. Yet the success achieved by Kilquahanity at such moments was discounted through long months of mingled suspicion and doubtful tolerance. Although both he and his wife were Catholics, so they said, and so it seemed, Kilquahanity never went to confession or took the Blessed Sacrament. The curé spoke to Kilquahanity's wife about it, and she said she could do nothing with her husband. Her tongue once loosed, she spoke freely, and what she said was little to the credit of Kilquahanity. Not that she could urge any horrible things against him, but she railed at minor faults till the curé dismissed her with some good advice upon wives rehearsing their husbands' faults, even to the parish priest. Mrs. Kilquahanity could not get the curé to listen to her, but she was more successful elsewhere. One day she came to get Kilquahanity's pension, which was sent every 3 months through Monsieur Guérin, the advocate. After she had handed over the receipt prepared beforehand by Kilquahanity, she replied to Monsieur Guérin's inquiry concerning her husband, in these words, Mr. Guérin, sir, such a man it is, enough to break the heart of any woman. And the temper of him, Mr. Guérin, the temper of him that's awful, awful. No consideration, and that ugly-hearted. Got win a soldier by. The things he does, my, the things he does. She threw up her hands with an air of distraction. Well, and what does he do, madame? Asked the advocate simply. And what he says, too, the awful of it, and the bad sour heart in him. What's he lying in his bed for now, and the new year coming on, when we ought to be praising God and enjoying each other's company in this blessed world? What's he lying between the quilts now for, but by token of the bad heart in him? It's a wicked cold he has, and how did he come by it? I'll tell ye, Mr. Garon. So wild was he, yesterday it was a week, so black mad with something I'd said to him, and something that slipped from me hand at his head, that he turns his back on me, throws open the door, steps out into the snow, and standing there alone, he curses the wide world. Oh dear, Mr. Garon, he cursed the wide world, standing there in the snow. God forgive the black heart of him, standing out there cursing the wide world." The advocate looked at the sergeant's wife musingly, the fingers of his hands tapping together, but he did not speak. He was becoming wiser, all in a moment, as to the ways of women. "And now he's in bed, the strapping blasphemer, for the cold he got standing there in the snow cursing the wide world. Ah, Mr. Garon, pity a poor woman that has to live with the loikes o' that." The advocate did not speak. He turned his face away and looked out of the window, where his eyes could see the little house on the hill, which today had the Union Jack flying in honour of some battle or some victory dear to Kilquahonnety's heart. It looked peaceful enough, the little house lying there in the waste of snow, banked up with earth, and sheltered on the northwest by a little grove of pines. At last Monsieur Garon rose, and lifting himself up and down on his toes, as if about to deliver a legal opinion, he coughed slightly, and then said in a dry little voice, "Madame, I shall have the pleasure in calling on your husband. You have not seen the matter in the true light. Madame, I bid you good day." That night the advocate, true to his promise, called on Sergeant Kilquahonnety. Kilquahonnety was alone in the house. His wife had gone to the village for the little chemist. She had been roused at last to the serious nature of Kilquahonnety's illness. Mr. Garon knocked. There was no answer. He knocked again more loudly, and still no answer. He opened the door and entered into a clean, warm living room, so hot that the heat came to him in waves, buffeting his face. Dining, sitting, and drawing room, it was also a sort of winter kitchen, and side by side with relics of Kilquahonnety's soldier life were clean, bright tins, black saucepans, strings of dried fruit, and well-cured hams. Certainly the place had an air of home. It spoke for the absent termagant. Monsieur Garon looked round and saw a half-opened door, through which presently came a voice speaking in a laboured whisper. The advocate knocked gently at the door. "May I come in, Sergeant?" he asked, and entered. There was no light in the room, but the fire in the kitchen stove threw a glow over the bed where the sick man lay. The big hands of the soldier moved restlessly on the quilt. "Aye, it's the kind of ye," said Kilquahonnety with difficulty, out of the half-shadows. The advocate took one burning hand in both of his, held it for a moment, and pressed it 2 or 3 times. He did not know what to say. "We must have a light," said he at last, and taking a candle from the shelf, he lighted it at the stove and came into the bedroom again. This time he was startled. Even in this short illness, Kilquahonnety's flesh had dropped away from him, leaving him but a bundle of bones, on which the skin quivered with fever. Every word the sick man tried to speak cut his chest like a knife, and his eyes half started from his head with the agony of it. The advocate's heart sank within him, for he saw that a life was hanging in the balance. Not knowing what to do, he tucked in the bedclothes gently. "I do be thinking," said the strained, whispering voice. "I do be thinking I could schmoke." The advocate looked round the room, saw the pipe on the window, and cutting some tobacco from a plug, he tenderly filled the old black corncob. Then he put the stem in Kilquahonnety's mouth and held the candle to the bowl. Kilquahonnety smiled, drew a long breath, and blew out a cloud of thick smoke. For a moment he puffed vigorously. Then, all at once, the pleasure of it seemed to die away, and presently the bowl dropped down on his chin. Monsieur Garon lifted it away. Kilquahonnety did not speak, but kept saying something over and over again to himself, looking beyond Monsieur Guerin abstractedly. At that moment the front door of the house opened, and presently a shrill voice came through the door. "Shmokin'! Shmokin'! Are ye, Kilquahonnety? As soon as me back's turned, it's playin' the fool." She stopped short, seeing the advocate. "Beggin' your pardon, Mr. Guerin," she said. "I thought it was only Kilquahonnety here, and he with no more sense than a babby." Kilquahonnety's eyes closed, and he buried one side of his head in the pillow, so that her shrill voice should not pierce his ears. "The little chemist'll be comin' in a minute, dear Mr. Guerin," said the wife presently, and she began to fuss with the bedclothes, and to be nervously and uselessly busy. "Oh, leave them alone, darlin'," whispered Kilquahonnety, tossing. Her officiousness seemed to hurt him more than the pain in his chest. Monsieur Guerin did not wait for the little chemist to arrive, but after pressing the sergeant's hand, he left the house and went straight to the house of the curé, and told him in what condition was the black sheep of his flock. When Monsieur Guerin returned to his own home, he found a visitor in his library. It was a woman, and between 40 and 50 years of age, who rose slowly to her feet as the advocate entered, and, without preliminaries, put into his hand a document. "That is who I am," she said. "Mary Muddock that was, Mary Kilquahonnety that is." The advocate held in his hands the marriage lines of Matthew Kilquahonnety of the parish of Malahide and Mary Muddock of the parish of St. Giles, London. The advocate was completely taken aback. He blew nervously through his pale fingers, raised himself up and down on his toes, and grew pale through suppressed excitement. He examined the certificate carefully, though from the first he had no doubt of its accuracy and correctness. "Well," said the woman, with a hard look in her face and a hard note in her voice. "Well." The advocate looked at her musingly for a moment. All at once there had been unfolded to him Kilquahonnety's story. In his younger days Kilquahonnety had married this woman, with a face of tin and a heart of leather. It needed no confession from Kilquahonnety's own lips to explain by what hard paths he had come to the reckless hour when, at Blackpool, he had left her forever, as he thought. In the flush of his criminal freedom he had married again, with the woman who shared his home on the little hillside, behind the parish church, she believing him a widower. Mary Muddock, with the stupidity of her class, had never gone to the right quarters to discover his whereabouts until a year before this day, when she stood in the advocate's library. At last, through the War Office, she had found the whereabouts of her missing Matthew. She had gathered her little savings together and, after due preparation, had sailed away to Canada to find the soldier boy whom she had never given anything but bad hours in all the days of his life with her. "Well," said the woman, "you're a lawyer. Have you nothing to say? You pay his pension. Next time you'll pay it to me. I'll teach him to leave me and my kid and go off with an Irish cook." The advocate looked her steadily in the eyes, and then delivered the strongest blow that was possible from the opposite side of the case. "Madam," said he, "Madam, I regret to inform you that Matthew Kilquahonnety is dying." "Dying, is he?" said the woman, with a sudden change of voice and manner, but her whine did not ring true. "The poor darlin', and only that Irish hag to care for him. Has he made a will?" she added eagerly. Kilquahonnety had made no will, and the little house on the hillside and all that he had belonged to this woman who had spoiled the first part of his life and had now come to spoil the last part. An hour later the advocate, the curé, and the two women stood in the chief room of the little house on the hillside. The door was shut between the two rooms, and the little chemist was with Kilquahonnety. The curé's hand was on the arm of the first wife, and the advocate's upon the arm of the second. The two women were glaring eye to eye, having just finished as fine a torrent of abuse of each other and of Kilquahonnety as can be imagined. Kilquahonnety himself, with the sorrow of death upon him, though he knew it not, had listened to the brawl, his chickens come home to roost at last. The first Mrs. Kilquahonnety had sworn, with an oath that took no account of the curé's presence, that not a stick nor stone, nor a rag nor a penny should that Irish slattern have of Matthew Kilquahonatides. The Curé and the Advocate had quieted them at last, and the Curé spoke sternly now to both women. "In the presence of death," said he, "have done with your sinful clatter. Stop quarrelling over a dying man. Let him go in peace. Let him go in peace. If I hear one word more," he added sternly, "I will turn you both out of the house into the night. I will have the man die in peace." Opening the door of the bedroom, the Curé went in and shut the door, bolting it quietly behind him. The little chemist sat by the bedside, and Kilquahonety lay as still as a babe upon the bed. His eyes were half closed, for the little chemist had given him an opiate to quiet the terrible pain. The Curé saw that the end was near. He touched Kilquahonety's arm. "My son," he said, "look up. You have sinned. You must confess your sins and repent." Kilquahonety looked at him with dazed but half-smiling eyes. "Are they gone? Are the women gone?" The Curé nodded his head. Kilquahonety's eyes closed and opened again. "They're gone, then. Oh, the foin of it, the foin of it," he whispered. "So quiet, so aisy, so quiet. Faith, I'll just be shlapin'. I'll be shlapin' now." His eyes closed, but the Curé touched his arm again. "My son," said he, "look up. Do you thoroughly and earnestly repent of your sins?" His eyes opened again. "Yis, father. Oh, yis. There's been a dale o' noise. There's been a dale o' noise in the world, father," said he. "Oh, so quiet now. I do be shlapin'." A smile crossed his face. "Oh, the foin of it. I do be shlapin'. And he fell into a noiseless sleep. End of section 22.